Welcome to the debate. Imagine a highly advanced piece of aerospace hardware, say a proprietary sensor array. The engineering is brilliant. The technical capability is, well, it's entirely unmatched.
Right, it's a completely flawless system.
Exactly, but when the schematics are handed to a government procurement officer, they're essentially written in invisible ink. The compliance stamps are missing, and there is no clear manual on how it actually integrates with existing systems.
So they literally can't defend it to their superiors.
Right. And therefore, they cannot buy it. Today, we are looking at a multi-billion-dollar blind spot in the defense sector. We're discussing why brilliant, mid-sized aerospace and federal contractors hit this massive revenue ceiling. And it's not because their technology fails.
No, it's because they are fundamentally impossible to buy from.
Precisely. We are focusing specifically on the challenges faced by business development leads at these mid-sized firms. We have to ask, does long-term defense scaling depend primarily on building systematized digital infrastructure and precise message architecture?
Or is it fundamentally driven by deep interpersonal relationships, human-led business development, and, political nuance? Because based on the source material we're analyzing today, there's a serious divide here.
There really is. And I argue that scale strictly requires an enablement architecture. A mission-focused digital presence has to act as the primary vehicle for trust transfer and initial credibility in the market. Without this systematized infrastructure, growth mathematically stalls.
And, speaking from the perspective of a veteran business development executive, someone who has spent decades navigating the immense, just crushing friction of the defense market, I look at the exact same stalling mid-sized firms and see a totally different root cause. Scale is not fundamentally capped by a lack of digital tools.
You don't think so?
Not at all. It is capped by the limits of human institutional knowledge, relationship control, and teaming dynamics. These are deeply complex human systems, incredibly reliant on political nuance and opportunity intelligence. A website or a CRM simply cannot replace that.
Okay, let's start with the baseline of how trust is established, because I think we're looking at two different phases of the funnel. The federal market rewards trust transfer, procurement readiness, and institutional precision far more than it rewards raw technical talent.
Sure, I'll agree with that part.
Right, so a firm's digital presence basically dictates its initial credibility. We have to fundamentally shift how we view a contractor's website. It cannot be a static brochure anymore. It must be an operational asset, functioning as a trust filter, a capture support tool, a teaming validation mechanism, and honestly, an accessible past performance library.
But see,
Wait, let me just finish this thought. When mid-sized firms rely solely on their business development personnel, their BD leads, to manually explain the company without digital weapons, they create this massive, unscalable drag.
Unscalable drag, okay.
Yes! Without targeted landing pages, sharp capabilities decks, or, clear contract vehicle mapping, the BD team ends up manually explaining the firm's core identity over and over again. The firm thinks it has a sales problem, but it actually has an enablement architecture problem.
You're looking at the symptoms, but let's actually look at the disease. I agree that a static, outdated website is a liability. Absolutely. But positioning digital enablement as the primary engine of scale, that fundamentally misunderstands how massive federal contracts are actually won.
How so?
Because true scale breaks down because institutional knowledge lives inside a few key individuals. Look at the typical growth engine of a mid-sized defense contractor. It usually depends on a founder, maybe one brilliant capture lead, or perhaps a retired flag officer.
Right, the hero model.
Exactly. Those individuals hold the specific agency relationships, they hold the pricing instincts, the painful lessons from past losses, and, most importantly, the political nuance. You cannot encode the political infighting between two directorates at the Pentagon onto a targeted landing page.
I see the logic there, but it totally breaks down when you expect that one retired flag officer to scale a $50 million pipeline. That reliance on individual heroes is exactly why these firms hit a ceiling in the first place.
Let me finish the thought, because the hero complex isn't the only growth killer here. The real hidden barrier, the mechanism that actually destroys scale, is loose teaming agreements. Mid-sized firms try to scale through partnerships and subcontracts with large prime contractors, but they build those agreements on hope rather than control.
Wait, hold on. Trace that for me. How exactly does a teaming agreement destroy scale if the firm's technical capability is sound?
I'll tell you exactly how the leakage occurs. You sign a vague teaming agreement with a massive prime contractor just to get on the bid because you haven't strictly defined the post-award roles or, legally ring-fence your proprietary engineering processes. What happens?
They learn your playbook.
Exactly. During the proposal phase, that prime gets direct access to your subject matter experts, your technical SMEs. They learn your integration methods, they map your talent, and the next time that contract cycles, they don't need you. They just bid the work themselves using the playbook you freely handed them during the capture phase.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they leak your learning, your opportunity intelligence, and your contacts. Business development in defense is long-cycle positioning and internal influence. It requires deep human navigation of institutional psychology to protect your firm's value. A targeted landing page doesn't stop a prime from cannibalizing your intellectual property.
Well, if a prime contractor is cannibalizing your IP, that is a legal and operational failure, absolutely. But let's look at why that prime contractor viewed you as expendable in the first place.
Because they could.
No, because you weren't institutionally legible to them. When you talk about human navigation and institutional psychology, you really have to look at the needs of mission-oriented decision makers. A contracting officer, a program manager, or a prime partner is fundamentally asking risk-based questions.
Risk-based. Sure.
They are asking, can this mid-sized firm survive compliance scrutiny, and can they be defended internally to my superiors? A generic digital presence signals massive operational risk to these buyers. If your industry classification codes, your NAICS alignment are a mess, the buyer literally doesn't know what regulatory bucket to put you in.
That's a minor administrative hurdle, though.
It is not minor to them. If your past performance is buried in a PDF from 2019, momentum is killed before your veteran BD executive even gets to make a phone call. The buyer starts wondering if the team is mature enough or if they're going to have to spend their own political capital explaining this contractor to their internal stakeholders.
Okay, you are completely conflating the needs of a mission-oriented decision maker with the needs of a technical evaluator.
Am I?
Yes, the contracting officer might care about the NAICS codes, yes, but let me offer a different analogy. A highly polished, targeted landing page is just a clean uniform. It's like a well-formatted API, an application programming interface.
Right, which is essential.
It allows two complex systems, like the government buyer and your firm, to talk to each other initially without throwing an administrative error code. It makes you legible. But if the underlying software, the actual technical capability and operational readiness, is full of bugs, that clean uniform doesn't win the firefight.
But you have to get to the firefight first.
Sure, but the people who actually evaluate these proposals, the technical evaluators, they're looking for raw capability, deep competitive knowledge, actual past pursuit history. They want to know if you truly understand the operational realities of their specific deployment environment. That kind of deep, specific trust is only proven through direct, rigorous interaction with technical SMEs and veteran capture leads. Search visibility and a nice past performance library might make the contracting officer feel secure, but it does not win the technical evaluation.
Let me stop you right there, because this is an asymmetric problem that contractors constantly misunderstand. Firms believe that if they just get their brilliant engineer in the room with the technical evaluator, they will win. But they are completely ignoring the massive confidence transfer problem that happens outside the room.
Confidence transfer.
Yes. Technical evaluators only evaluate what the mission maker lets through the gate. Imagine your veteran BD rep has a fantastic meeting. They articulate the mission perfectly. The technical SMEs have a great exchange. But then the follow-up email points the prime partner to a generic capability statement rather than a mission-segmented operational asset. Say, a page dedicated specifically to Space Force secure infrastructure.
And you honestly think a dedicated web page is going to sway a Space Force technical evaluator? Please.
I think the lack of one destroys the momentum. The trust gap widens instantly. The buyer looks at the generic site and thinks, they sounded like they understood Space Force secure infrastructure in the room, but their entire digital infrastructure says they are just a general IT staffing shop.
That's a job.
It's the reality of how people verify claims. The website shouldn't sit on the sidelines while the BD team does all the heavy lifting. It needs to be a forward-positioned asset that acts as a force multiplier. If your digital presence contradicts your human narrative, the bureaucracy will default to the lowest risk option, which is usually rejecting you. Traffic without precision is wasted trust.
Well, that assumes the buyer is relying on the website to validate the conversation rather than relying on their existing relationship with the BD executive or the reputation of the firm in the market.
They rely on both.
But let's look back at the teaming aspect, which is where the real evaluation happens. Primes and teaming partners might glance at your website to ensure you actually exist, but they are evaluating your firm based on the strength of your teaming architecture. If you have vague teaming agreements, no defined pursuit obligations, no protection of relationships, no rigid structure for post-award roles, you are building dependency without control.
I agree that's a problem.
It's the fatal problem. A bad teaming structure doesn't just lose one single deal. It bleeds your competitive advantage across multiple pursuits. Your digital API can be completely flawless, but if your human-negotiated partnership agreements are politically soft, you will never break through to the next revenue band because you are constantly giving away your leverage.
Okay, let's examine that intersection between teaming and messaging, because this brings us to the absolute necessity of message architecture. You mentioned that primes are constantly evaluating the firm. A scaling contractor needs entirely different layers of messaging for different audiences, and this simply cannot be managed manually.
It's been managed manually for decades.
And that's why mid-sized firms stall. Many of them use one flat capability statement for everyone. When a mid-sized firm hands a massive prime contractor a flat, generic capability statement, they are basically handing over a jigsaw puzzle without the picture on the box.
Okay, that's a fair point.
The prime doesn't have the time to figure out where you fit into their bid. A prime partner wants to see gap-filling capabilities, responsiveness, and execution confidence. Conversely, a government buyer wants mission alignment and low risk. If you don't explicitly say, we filled this specific cybersecurity gap for this specific contract vehicle, the prime just moves on.
Right.
Scale requires narrative compression. If your offer cannot be understood in seconds, it will not travel inside the bureaucracy. The firm that explains the mission impact most clearly almost always beats the firm with slightly better technology that's trapped in dense engineering jargon. Audience-specific messaging outscales reliance on individual human navigators every single time.
I understand the theory of narrative compression. I do. But let's talk about the realistic return on investment and, frankly, the profound risk of tailoring message architecture for every single buyer.
The risk?
Yes. You are talking about building bespoke digital infrastructure for the Army, the Navy, the intelligence community, defense agencies outside the military branches, the so-called Fourth Estate, and every prime you want to work with. If the internal operational delivery systems aren't mature, that slick precision marketing becomes actively dangerous.
Dangerous in what way? Generating more highly targeted leads is exactly what these firms need to scale?
Dangerous because proposal growth routinely outruns operational maturity. Let's trace the mechanism of how this fails. You use precision marketing and targeted message architecture to win 3 new massive task orders. Great, right?
Right.
But your internal human systems, your hiring pipeline, your clearance processing, your project management aren't integrated with your capture pipeline. You win the work on Friday, but you literally don't have the cleared engineers to staff it on Monday.
This week, the government customer gets frustrated, your margin erodes because you are suddenly paying premium rates to scramble for talent. Now that slick marketing has actively damaged your past performance rating. And in federal contracting, a bad performance score haunts you for years. Winning more work through polished message architecture actually damages the firm if the human and operational systems aren't scaled to handle the sheer weight of that growth.
I mean, I see the worst-case scenario you're painting, but I fundamentally disagree that enablement architecture is what causes that execution chaos. In fact, you are treating enablement purely as an external marketing function rather than an internal operational discipline.
Well, marketing is what we've been talking about, landing pages, websites.
It's more than that. The systematization I am advocating for actually prevents the very operational collapse you're describing.
Wait, how does a targeted landing page prevent a staffing shortfall?
It's not just the landing page, it's the infrastructure behind it. When you build reusable growth infrastructure, you are turning founder knowledge into documented systems. You are creating a stable foundation. Because how does a firm build market memory operationally? It doesn't happen by accident.
No, it takes years of consistent delivery.
And consistent messaging. You take the knowledge trapped in your veteran capture lead's head, the specific reasons why you won that rugged edge compute contract 2 years ago, and you codify it into a pursuit knowledge base. You enforce a CRM discipline where every interaction a BD rep has is logged, tagged, and used to refine the core message.
Okay, CRM discipline is notoriously hard to enforce with veteran BD guys, but go on.
Hard but necessary. When you do that, you aren't just winning more, you are building market memory. Scale comes when the market begins to remember you for one or two specific things. For example, being the definitive integrator that makes multi-OEM environments, multiple original equipment manufacturers, actually work together securely. If you just chase contract vehicles without building that market memory through consistent, codified digital infrastructure, every new opportunity starts from zero. That exhausts your internal teams and guarantees the operational chaos you're worried about.
I will agree with you on the concept of market memory. Picking what you want to be known for, owning one or two categories in the mind of the buyer, is absolutely essential. And I'll also grant that ambiguity is severely punished by procurement friction.
Right.
Federal growth is often slowed by administrative friction more than actual competition. Unclear NAICS alignment, vague differentiators, disorganized past performance references, all of these create a silent tax on growth. But whether that friction is ultimately resolved through digital infrastructure or human relationships is where we remain sharply divided. I maintain that making a company legible and easy to categorize is ultimately the job of experienced human navigators who understand the specific, unspoken pressures of the procurement officers they are dealing with.
But trace that human navigator's Tuesday afternoon for me. Let's say they get an email from a contracting officer at the Defense Logistics Agency asking for past performance on a specific logistics node. What do?
They pull the relevant past performance data.
But how? If that BD rep has to dig through a fragmented internal server, email 3 different project managers who are currently on site, and manually stitch together a document that maps their capabilities to the agency's problem, they are burning critical time. They are experiencing friction.
Well, sure. Disorganized files are a problem in any business.
But if, instead, they have access to an enablement platform with shareable landing pages, dynamically updated past performance libraries, and CRM-connected lead capture, they pull a modular, compliant response in 10 minutes. The digital infrastructure doesn't replace the human's insight, it scales it. It ensures that the confidence the BD rep builds in a conversation moves cleanly through the website, the capabilities narrative, and the delivery handoff. If confidence cannot move cleanly through those layers without manual intervention, revenue stalls.
You are assuming the buyer's journey is linear, though. Like, they meet the BD rep, they check the website, they read the highly targeted landing page, they feel confident. But in the defense market, confidence is deeply lateral.
Lateral.
Yes. It is whispered in the halls of the Pentagon. It is shared between prime contractors during a joint venture dispute. You're treating a defense contract like a B2B software sale. It's not. A CRM can tell you that the Army bought rugged edge compute last year. It cannot tell you that the 2-star general sponsoring the new program just lost a budget battle to the Air Force, and the contracting officer is now under intense pressure to rescope the entire requirement to fit a different funding vehicle.
Okay, that's incredibly specific opportunity intelligence.
Exactly. And that level of opportunity intelligence doesn't get logged in a drop-down menu. It is shared quietly between trusted peers. If your teaming structures are loose, if your partner performance is undocumented and politically unmanaged, the best digital API in the world won't save you. Credibility in the space is institutional. It is about whether your internal growth teams function as a cohesive unit that primes and government agencies fundamentally trust. That cohesion comes from systematizing human knowledge, yes, but it remains fundamentally a human endeavor.
The whisper in the halls of the Pentagon matters, absolutely. I'm not denying that. But what happens after the whisper?
They bring you in for a meeting.
Eventually, maybe. But first, the stakeholder goes back to their desk and looks you up. They have to justify that whispered recommendation to a compliance officer who wasn't in the hallway, and that compliance officer requires institutional precision. They need to see compliance confidence signals. If your firm targets the government as if it were one homogeneous audience, you fail that test.
Right. The government is wildly fragmented.
Exactly. The Army buyer and the civilian IT buyer carry entirely different timelines, approval paths, and political realities. Without audience-specific message architecture, your marketing stays generic and your BD conversations stay shallow because they are constantly fighting just to establish a baseline of credibility.
Shallow BD conversations are certainly a failure point. But again, a website cannot pivot when a program manager reveals a sudden, unannounced shift in their budget authorization. The ability to adapt to political nuance in real time is the hallmark of a veteran BD executive. When mid-sized firms try to scale, they hit a ceiling because they simply do not have enough of these veteran executives, and they fail to transfer those instincts into the DNA of the business through rigorous internal training and tighter teaming architectures. You want to encode it into digital tools? I argue you must protect your opportunity intelligence from leaking to your partners and train your human systems to navigate the friction.
It seems we've arrived at a pretty fascinating synthesis of our positions here. To summarize my perspective, mid-sized defense, federal, and aerospace firms really must evolve their digital presence from a static brochure into a mission-focused operational asset. Scale requires an enablement architecture, targeted landing pages, precision marketing, and audience-specific message architecture to transfer confidence and reduce procurement friction at scale. Without it, the business development team is forced to build trust manually in every single pursuit, which is mathematically unscalable.
And to summarize my stance, while digital tools can certainly support the mission by acting as an initial API, scaling ultimately relies on human infrastructure. It requires systematizing the deep institutional knowledge held by key individuals and tightening teaming architectures to protect relationships and opportunity intelligence. The digital uniform might look sharp, but the human navigation of complex, long-cycle institutional psychology is what actually sustains the growth and prevents operational chaos.
But what we undeniably agree on is the core reason these contractors fail to scale. It's almost never a lack of technical talent or engineering capability.
No, almost never.
It is a failure to become legally, operationally, and institutionally easy to buy. Procurement friction severely punishes ambiguity. Whether a firm is vague online with a generic capability statement or vague in its partnership agreements, the market perceives that ambiguity as massive risk.
Absolutely. Both prime partners and government procurement officers are evaluating the entire system. They're looking at the digital legibility, yes, but they are deeply scrutinizing the human relationship systems and the operational maturity of their contractor partners. Growth isn't just about winning more proposals through narrative compression. It's about preserving trust while expanding your delivery load. There is so much more to explore regarding how operational maturity handles the sheer weight of scaled growth, and honestly, what happens to a firm's past performance when those systems break under pressure.
Indeed. It forces business development leads to take a really hard look at their own organizations. You have to ask yourself where your leverage truly lies. Do you need to invest more heavily in your digital enablement architecture to stop the slow, unscalable leak of credibility? Or do you need to tighten your human and teaming infrastructure to protect the relationships and intelligence you have fought so hard to build?
It's a delicate balance, and there really is no single right answer for every firm. The path to the next revenue band requires brutal honesty about where your specific growth engine is currently stalling.
We will leave it there for our listeners to weigh. We return to our opening image. You can engineer the most brilliant aerospace hardware in the world, but if the blueprints are illegible, the capability is invisible. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.